The numerous dilemmas and challenges presented by the war in Ukraine have engaged the world in a massive geopolitical struggle, with countries wanting to support their allies and personal interests while being neutral enough to avoid escalation. While it's hard to completely understand the many life and death decisions being made by political powers both inside Ukraine and out, the focus of this video is to inform the viewer about the information you need to understand the significance of actions currently under consideration and the potential consequences they may bring. Some of the largest consequences the Russian Federation has faced for its invasion of Ukraine have been with regards to its economy. With numerous countries participating in unparalleled coordinated sanctions, CNN reported that the West is running out of sanctions since its response to Russia was so swift and severe. Nonetheless, many are arguing that current sanctions do not go far enough. There are calls to remove Russia from the World Trade Organization, and the Washington Post reported that the White House is considering imposing secondary sanctions on additional countries. There is also growing interest in coordinating better sanctions against Russian billionaires, some of whom face such economic penalties from some countries, and not others. Without a doubt, the largest economic tool currently not being implemented is to ban trade of Russian oil, coal, and gas. This has been highly unpopular in much of Europe, reports Forbes, as Russia accounts for more than 25% of all EU crude oil imports. With such a large amount of energy coming from Russia, it is not possible to stop its import without massive economic impacts on Europe and the world as a whole. Although an immediate ban on trade of Russian energy does not seem likely, many countries in the EU itself are working hard to try and reduce their consumption of Russian energy as quickly as possible. In an interview with CNN, EU Commissioner for Energy Kadri Simpson stated,
"We cannot stop using it overnight, but we can make this progress very fast, and we are determined to do that."
With the EU stating that they can reduce EU demand for Russian gas by 2/3 before the end of the year. Considering that 60% of Russia's oil exports go to Europe and that said energy exports make up a significant percentage of Russia's economy, such a move from Europe would have a devastating effect on Russia's economy and their ability to fund their war. Some analysts are saying a total oil embargo from Europe may be inevitable. Meanwhile, others point to a disagreement among leaders, arguing that a total embargo is less likely. What is clear, however, is that such a plan is being seriously discussed and considered. One of the most confusing and uncertain aspects of the war has been the actions of Belarus and whether or not they would join the war. The West had intelligence that they would join the war shortly after Russia's invasion, but the Belarusian soldiers never arrived. Now that Belarus has declared that they will not join the war, chaos has seemingly ensued within its military as Belarusian citizens work to impede both Russian advancement and that of their own army. Belarus is also not subject to Russia's highly restricted media, thus leading to war with Ukraine being overwhelmingly unpopular among Belarusians. However, there is yet again intelligence stating that Belarus is likely to join the war. According to Ukraine's intelligence service, Belarus may send up to 15,000 troops. According to one Belarusian opposition source, this would have less of an impact militarily than it will geopolitically, given the implications of another country joining the war, reported CNN. Belarus has so far experienced less severe sanctions than Russia. However, this would undoubtedly change if they were to invade. Involvement would destabilize Belarus, one anonymous NATO official told CNN. Of all the political actors tasked with making difficult decisions, NATO possesses the most daunting task of navigating the decisions which perhaps have the largest consequences. Ukraine and much of Eastern Europe are arguing that more military involvement is required, but the major Western powers are arguing that this must be avoided at all costs due to fears of starting a Third World War and the potential for nuclear war. Much of Eastern Europe, with Poland at the forefront, have been arguing for Ukraine's entrance into the EU, for establishing a no-fly zone, for sending fighter jets, and for sending in NATO forces for a humanitarian mission. A no-fly zone seems unlikely, as it would require attacking Russian aircraft and ground air defenses, which would almost certainly lead to NATO at war with Russia and the possibility of nuclear war, explained NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg. Further, the idea is not supported by many of Ukraine's largest allies, with Lithuania stating a no-fly zone would be irresponsible. Much to the confusion of the public, NATO has been purposefully unclear about what would constitute firm boundaries that Putin cannot cross, arguing that the Kremlin should not be aware of how the U.S. would respond to any given provocation.
First off, wise not to be explicit about what you will do or what you won't do. Let Putin guess.
President Biden stated that if Russia uses chemical or biological weapons, then they would face serious consequences. However, the White House has not elaborated on what those might be. As to why this could be escalatory, NBC News reports, a chemical or biological attack would mark a dramatic escalation for the conflict. These types of weapons would also risk spilling over into neighboring NATO countries such as Poland, raising the question of whether the alliance would have to respond. The one clear signal NATO is sending to Putin about how they would respond to a provocation is regarding if a NATO country is attacked. The US and NATO collectively have stationed about 140,000 troops in Eastern Europe and have committed to defending every inch of NATO territory. There is significant concern about this commitment potentially leading to escalation if an attack accidentally crossed the border and entered one of the 4 member states of NATO which border Ukraine. According to a previous Italian ambassador to NATO, the risk of incidents if there are hostile actions at the border is really high. If there was a misfire, NATO could be at war. A seemingly impossible proposal from Poland is to send in NATO troops to provide humanitarian aid to Ukrainian citizens. In an interview, the Polish ambassador to the United States clarified that the peacekeeping soldiers would not be sent in if there was a possibility of escalation and engagement with Russian forces. However, this raises the question of how peacekeeping forces could be sent at all. The ambassador insisted that it was a preliminary concept and that such ideas should be considered in case Russia escalates the war. He also stated that the troops would not need to be from NATO, but could be from a different alliance of nations. Perhaps an evolution of this idea is French President Macron's idea announced on Friday to send in humanitarian aid to the city of Mariupol, deep in the Donbass region within Russian-occupied territory. This humanitarian mission would be conducted with the aid of Greece and Turkey. Although the details announced publicly remain unclear, Macron has stated that he wishes to conduct this mission within the next few days, and that would require cooperation with Putin and the withdrawal of Russian forces. It is unclear how much danger humanitarian workers would be in, or what the threat of escalation would be if Russian forces attack them. More explanation to the public is required before we understand the details and implications of such a mission. According to former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Wesley Clark, Russia has planned and trained during exercises to attack a populated area of Poland with a smaller, low-yield nuclear weapon. He stated in an interview saying, "This is what's usually done in the Russian exercises." He further explained that in Russian exercises, this is done as a last resort measure when losing significantly, and that the intent is to cause so much fear in NATO of a nuclear war that they would concede the war through diplomatic channels.
So this is the way the Russians have educated themselves to think about what they would do in a circumstance like this. And this is why there's so much concern on the part of the administration and other NATO leaders, because we all know this.
Russia does indeed appear serious about keeping nuclear weapons as an option on the table. CNN reported that Russian President Vladimir Putin's chief spokesperson refused to deny that Moscow could resort to the use of nuclear weapons. Dmitry Peskov repeatedly refused to rule out that Russia would consider using nuclear weapons. This makes it all the more worrying that at the time of the invasion, Belarus changed their constitution to now allow nuclear weapons to be stationed in the country. At a UN arms control meeting, the US warned Russia that any movement of Russian nuclear weapons into Belarus would be dangerously provocative and further destabilize the region. The Russian-Ukrainian war has presented many new challenges, unlike others we have faced in modern history, and there is significant debate between leaders and allies about what actions to take. Most nations have demonstrated an extreme fear of escalating the war into a larger conflict that involves more nations or nuclear weapons. Although much remains unclear, we can at the very least understand the actions being considered and their potential consequences. This has been The War Watch. Thanks for watching.